Good people, please start making your way back into the main room. Yes, no, maybe. Ladies and gentlemen, please do come in and take your seats. There will be more coffee at lunchtime. Sit wherever you like, apart from Andrea, who may need to sit next to me.
I thought I was seat 2.
Oh, seat 2? Oh, you're told. Okay, sit there. Yes, you're told. You all know where you're sitting. Oh, you've all got your microphones in number. Brilliant, of course. Good. Good, good. All right, well, he's at the other end. That's good, because we'll start with him. Okay. Thank you all very much. We're very timely today. We're actually running a little bit ahead of schedule. And with that, I'm going to give us time now. We're going to watch that video that David had prepared earlier. So if we're ready with the technical team, let's have a look at that video as you're all coming in.
Tendering. Create a single European market. Public procurement is the acquisition of goods and services on behalf of a public authority. It accounts for up to 1/5 of the European Union's gross domestic product. Currently, most public procurement is done locally within a country using traditional ways of communication, mainly paper. Europe offers lots of business opportunities. Many of these are in the public sector. Suppliers from different member states are interested in bidding for these contracts. There are over 300,000 contracting authorities in the EU. However, submitting a tender offer across EU borders can be a cumbersome task. With each new tender, suppliers have to fulfill lots of criteria and provide the same evidence over and over again. After all this investment of time and effort, chances of winning the contract can still be low. E-procurement or e-tendering has eased this process. Its smart implementation can generate huge savings, between 5 to 20%. This would bring at least 100 billion euros back to the public funds. In the last decade, as e-tendering systems emerged throughout Europe, over 200 systems have been built to support buyers and suppliers. However, only 5% of European business opportunities can be readily accessed by business outside the country where the tender originated. Cross-border barriers, like qualifications which are not recognized, varying requirements for e-signatures, and selective electronic tools can make it almost impossible to readily submit a tender across an EU border. eSense, a large-scale IT project funded by the European Commission, can help solve this problem. It has developed a solution which allows for various European states to communicate seamlessly on a digital e-tendering platform. eSense used X-Vergabe from Germany as basis for its development. How did we do this? Firstly, an infrastructure was created. A digital highway for information to travel across Europe. eSense e-delivery gateway software can find all registered bidders and connect them across all EU states. Then, national tendering systems were connected to these software gateways so that they could send and receive tender information irrespective of the language or national format of that information. To achieve this seamless information exchange, eSense uses standards from the European Committee for Standardization, which provide a semantic interoperability framework for public procurement messages. With these standards embedded in the information flow, organizations are able to understand each other's tender submissions. They can extract information from different national formats, translate it, and accept it based on their own national standards and formats. As a result of the eSense Digital Procurement Gateway, several business opportunities across EU borders have emerged. For the first time in its company history, a Dutch business has applied for an opportunity in Germany and Denmark. The contracting authorities in those countries have confirmed offer registrations, and in each case, the companies were able to submit their own nationally approved documents and evidence as they would if tendering for business at home. Who did this? The cross-border digital communication was designed during the piloting phase of eSense, thanks to the collaboration of a number of public bodies and private companies. In Denmark, the Ministry of Finance, DIGST, in cooperation with Innovation and IBM Denmark, has set up a gateway and connected the Danish tendering system Ethics. In Germany, the procurement agency of the Federal Ministry of Interior, in cooperation with Governicus and the University of Koblenz, has connected the federal German tendering system e-Vergabe. In the Netherlands, the Ministry of Economy has connected the Dutch tendering system TenderNet to the Danish gateway. And in Greece, the University of Piraeus has set up a gateway now supporting the German tendering system e-Vergabe. eSense cooperated with the European Committee for Standardization's Business Interoperability Interface Initiative and with the European Commission's Directorate General for Internal Markets. What is the future? This eSense pilot proved it is possible to connect tendering systems and step forward in public procurement throughout Europe. The project focuses on new messages to digitally support a full EU-wide procurement process. If you want to learn more about the project, please visit the eSense website.
Okay, thank you very much for that, bringing that along, David. That's a nice little introduction to our panel. Since we have some new people, I will just very quickly introduce. Next to me, we have Isabel Cook from Barclays, Marta Ieneka from GSMA, David Hickson from IBM, and then Mark Greenaway from Adobe, and introducing to you then Andrea Servida, who is the head of unit for e-government and trust at DG Connect in the European Commission. So we haven't heard from you, Andrea, so let me ask for your initial reactions to what you saw in the opening showcases.
First of all, good morning to everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here and address such a crowd, I hope to be able to contribute to the discussion, but just highlighting a few things. The showcasing that we have seen today put forward a few things that I think it's worth, I would say, highlighting. First, the key role of private sector and the opportunities that we have for society, for our economy, for the private sector to deliver towards making the digital single market a growth creation opportunity for all. I think that what we can see is how the effort that has been put by member states, the Commission, to develop interoperable infrastructures for electronic signature, electronic identity, e-delivery, e-invoicing, is actually bringing a lot of opportunities to everybody. The pilot that we saw with GSMA, Mobile Connect, is actually making the opportunity that normally are associated to the use of electronic ID for governmental use, to bring them to full fruition in a mobile dimension. And being mobile means that you have new needs, new opportunities, and we have to make sure that this is not just for public sectors. This is why I'm so glad that there is a project that we are also supporting for cross-border opening of a bank account between the UK and France, which actually operationalized the use of digital identity under EIDAS for the purpose of meeting the regulatory requirements which are associated to ensuring that the person, the prospective client that is opening a bank account remotely is actually identified in full compliance with what is the anti-money laundering framework, which is under revision, and we believe that when adopted, if adopted, the anti-money laundering number 5 will make even clearer how digital identity could lead to these compliance without any problem. But all this means also that, the private sector should be supported in the work that they are doing by having governments as a partner. I think that that was another message that in the context of developing the building blocks that we have been taking into account, because none of us is going to resolve all the issues in the digital alone, but we need really to partner together to be able to make this huge investment, intellectual, technical, economic investment, to really bring value to citizens, enterprises, public authorities. The last element that I would like to say is we are talking about building blocks. And building blocks means that indeed we need to compose, as I think Max, I would say, alluded to, as in a kind of a Lego framework. And this could be done for any type of, I would say, business process that you may have in mind. But even the Commission, even the Europe legislator is looking at the way in which this could be done in the context of the single digital gateway, the way in which the once only principle can be, for the first time ever, be operationalized cross-border in the scope of the 13 procedures that are in the proposal of the Commission, and now in the amended text that has received the general approach agreement by the Council. Because in order to operationalize once only principle cross-border, we need to ensure that indeed users, which means citizens and businesses, are identified, they are legally binded to their consent, documents, evidences are fetched where they are exchanged, so it means that they have to be supported by a delivery mechanism in place. And of course, they do respect all the data protection requirements in relation to minimization of data and prior consent for the request. And all this could be done with building blocks. The project TOOP, which is ongoing, involving more than 20 member states, is indeed prototyping how the building blocks can be put together and complemented, for instance, with directories, to make sure that these could be operationalized cross-border, which means that a citizen will be able to access a procedure in a country and make sure that the data that are already available in digital form in another country could be fetched at his or her request based on the legal framework which support the exchange, where these data are. And this goes in the direction of frictionless experience, more convenience, and more, I would say, time to do more creative tasks instead of having to deal with bureaucracy.
Okay, Marta, I noticed you nodding along there. Would you like to comment? I think you were agreeing with quite a lot that Andrea was saying.
I think, thanks. I think Andrea put a lot of work, and we are really thankful as well for the great efforts that have been during the implementation of the eIDAS regulation, as well as the implementation regulation framework, which actually detail the underpinning framework for interoperability and technical interoperability. So I think the self-building blocks somehow also are the second phase of what is been, the sort of legal underpinning framework, which has been built through eIDAS and through the technical requirements that we are working together with government sectors and the mobile operators in order to enable a solution which is convenient and can be adapted as well to the needs of the private sector services. CEF, I think, has done, and the building blocks are incredibly important in respect of using and leveraging the lessons learned from electronic identification authentication for public sector services and establish the common basis and minimum standards. However, in order to really enable take-up of authentication to the user, whether it's through mobile means or through other means, could be through bank ID in a mobile environment, it needs to work on the requirements of the private sector services as well. So this collaboration and this opportunity to work in test environments with the IDaaS nodes, with the private sector, mobile operators and the service providers on use cases which are not only enabling access to e-government services, but which are also enabling access to transactions which are our everyday use, I think will be a key sort of milestone to get to the bright digital future that we all want to achieve. So, yeah. Thanks.
Well, many of you touched on it in your showcases about the importance of authentication for business. But I want you to try and maybe tell me how important by comparison with, say, public services. Is it more? Is it less? What are the other big considerations? Who would like to take that one first? Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a huge opportunity in delivering e-government services in cost reduction, service improvement, speed, time to service. There is the potential for some crossover in the business world as well. It's not essential, it's not necessary. I'd pull out an example from the Nordic countries where, and this is in parallel to what's happening in the banking sector in UK and elsewhere, but Bank ID, for example, is an important part of identity in Sweden. And it's used in Finland as well, for example. It's a form of it is used in Denmark, where you authenticate to your bank, but you can use that identity for certain e-government services as well. That's a very practical approach to this, but it's still somewhat standalone. And we see an opportunity for integrating and working much more broadly, for example, with that kind of approach. There is no reason in countries where there is a database and there is an ID to invest more in e-government services. There is the potential to even deliver that sort of e-government service in countries that don't have a national database, and Isabel talked about an approach to doing that with various different providers this morning.
Well, Isabel, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, so I think knowing who your customer is important for loads of different industries and loads of different sectors. And that authentication piece is really important when you're interacting with them online. And you have obviously the classic regulated sectors who are required to know who it is that they're interacting with. But I think I'd like to think broader than that as well. Let's look at the sharing economy. That's a really kind of peer-to-peer interaction. If we could have, for example, Airbnb, if you could have authenticated the people who are coming to you sort of look after your house for a week, and you could know that that was their real identity, so that if anything were to go wrong, you really do know who that was, rather than they maybe perhaps just created a false account. And so I think the sharing economy and loads of other industries as well they may not right now have any regulation or any really strong authentication methods, but that's not to say that they couldn't use them to improve their services. So I think it's sort of looking broader than just government and banks. Let's look at who else can start using this.
David, let me ask you, drawing on what Isabel has said, do you see a difference between regulated and unregulated industries in encouraging take-up, or who's going to be most interested in using the IDaaS building block?
Okay, by regulated, you mean utilities, or you're talking about government?
The sectors, yeah.
Utilities are there is a lot of uptake and they tend to be fairly advanced. A lot of that is because they're very capital intensive, and they're, I guess, encouraged to be capital intensive because they are regulated industries and they make money based on how much they spend. And then the gas industry, I think, here in Europe, they have a group, ENTSOG, and they've jumped on the whole e-delivery building block and are using it within, I guess, for trading gas. Gas flows through pipelines, and it has to be billed, and it ends up in different countries, and they're using it there. So I think regulated industries are, a good example, and I think they do tend to uptake with this sort of technology. Okay. And then unregulated industries, it varies by industry. I think some of the some of the largest ones, I think, are the ones that jump on it as, I guess, most quickly. The large retailers and that sort of company. Ones that have like tens of thousands of trading partners, they really feel the pain of managing all this, and they're looking for ways to save money and cut costs and make this easier. So industries that have very, very large players, large manufacturers, large retail, and the unregulated industry. So I see it really across all industries. And then government is, the government sector, the public sector is very active in this as well. I mean, here in Europe, they actually drive the whole effort. So I think the uptake has been, I haven't really seen much difference, I suppose, but more by industry rather than by their, public or private or that sort of a thing.
Okay, well, I guess the next question is quite obvious then. It's about smaller businesses. I mean, Barclays, IBM, Adobe, and the members of GSMA are all huge. What about small, medium-sized enterprises, which is, we always hear it, the backbone of European growth? How do we encourage take-up there? Isabel?
Yeah, I think ultimately it's going to be, it is a challenge, as you say, because the large industries will have a way to connect to these systems. But I think ultimately it is about what technical infrastructure you're building. If you're able to, so in the banking sector at the moment, we're really focusing on our API suite. What's our suite of APIs? How can we start using those to connect to other organizations more easily, passing data as part of under open banking? Well, what if there's a way to do that so that it's really simple for small businesses to integrate? APIs are a natural way to do that if they have a digital presence, but ultimately it's just looking at making that interoperability easy and not really time consuming, not really costly. Let's create sort of channels that people can just connect to once rather than having lots and lots of bilateral contracts and agreements in place, for example.
Okay, somebody else too.
Yeah, no, I just maybe would like to add on Rebecca's point. Of course, I think there are lots of variety, which, as we have seen, that sort of demands identity. But I think important is also how we build, a digital life, which is, right and can work for everyone and for every citizen, and how we can use identity authentication to actually strengthen the capability of the end user to actually also have rights on this digital life. So how we are building digital entitlement and how we are using authentication for providing access to services that can be used also in legal proceedings are required for the gas industry, but also required for the end users and the normal everyday use of your transactions online. So it's very important to be able to revoke your identity as well as to affirm who you say you are online. So I think there are space for everyone really in this market, which makes it so appealing and interesting as well.
Andrea, do you have any thoughts on scalability and getting buy-in from all, from individuals right up to the big players?
SMEs is quite a diverse community in Europe. I mean, we're talking about in excess of 24 million entities. And there we have the most innovative companies and the one really lagging behind. But when it comes to using technologies, of course, what really drives is legal certainty, to understand exactly that if I engage, because when you engage in the digital with certain supporting services, whether it's electronic signature or electronic identification, you are not confronted or going to be confronted with legal challenges that you can perhaps master easily in the jurisdiction where you are most active, but when you are digital, you can expose to more, and that sometimes is a barrier. But at the same time, you need to make the access to these services, how can I say, easy, in the sense that, if complexity stays in the way in which the services are provided, then of course, the experience will be far from being frictionless. And there is where we need to work more, and this is why also as a Commission we have been looking, and there is a study ongoing on how really to reach out, what are the magnifiers that we have to bear in mind to reach out to the small and medium enterprise, how we can really bring the good experience to give a full fruition to all small and medium enterprises in Europe. And let's not forget, for identity, actually Europe is a region, and IADAS is providing legal certainty for recognition of electronic identification means for natural persons, so human beings, but also legal persons. There are countries where identifiers are also associated directly or via a natural person to companies, and the others give legal certainty to the use of those cross-border to access public services. Why this is important? It is important because whether we are working in a regulated or less regulated environment, what is indeed, I would say, to be seen in relation to identity is that there is an opportunity. There is no law which imposes to a shop to accept my identity card, but if I have to prove my age, perhaps because I want to buy alcohol or tobacco, then okay, the shop may rely on that. Banks, perhaps they are required to rely on identity card. And the same is for the digital. Once you have the certainty that cross-border, the digital credentials are relied upon up to the level of guaranteeing the in-person verification of the counterpart in the transaction that you are concluding, and this hold for the public sectors cross-border, there is no reason why for the private sector the bar should be higher. It cannot be higher. And even more importantly, if this is already operation for the public sector, relying on those services will enhance the legal compliance and limit the legal risk that may be, I would say, may be associated to relying on these services. I think that there is where small and medium enterprise need to be supported. They need to understand that it's possible, that this is possible in a fully legally binding framework, and is an opportunity. It's an opportunity because it's going to be seamless, and experience like the one of the two projects or what has been done under the eSense project shows that it can be seamless from public to private, cross-border and cross-sector.
Well, you mentioned frictionless a couple of times, so now I'm thinking about interoperability. And so I want to ask, what role do standards play within that? Mark, how important are standards? Should they be mandatory? Should we be looking at self-imposed standards?
There's a nice theme there from small and medium business in that they have the most to gain. And if we want to help small and medium business really grow, they need a platform, okay? And they need the ability to operate cross-border. What enables that? The thing that enables that is the standard, okay? So EIDAS is a standard. It's something which we need to drive adoption and encourage adoption of, and make sure that we have a platform for SMB particularly, who cannot influence various, least of all, remote national legislation. They need something which they can work to cross-border, because the biggest opportunity to really help them grow is cross-border.
Okay, David, what are your thoughts? I mean, you mentioned standards in your presentation.
Standards are absolutely crucial. In the B2B world, you could not exist without them. Okay, it's like the only way we can actually succeed. Could we make them mandatory? Well, not really. They are by de facto mandatory, but each industry has to come up with its own standards, and you need to be free to pick whatever they want. It doesn't really interfere with interoperability because within their industry, everyone's using the same standards. So, and then for the small to medium business, that again, the standards are absolutely crucial, because if you're a small to medium enterprise, you can't deal with 28 different governments, for example, in a different way. There has to be like one standard way in which you interface to those particular governments, so that like the public procurement, they have to have a standard, and the standard is probably the greatest help to the small to medium enterprise, because they're the ones least able to apply resources to deal with the differences between the different countries.
Okay. Marta, GSMA members know all about standards.
Yeah, it's quite complicated business, actually. I mean, I think, most of the time there are also some confusions about what the standards are. Especially for identity, there is a variety of standards. It spans from regulatory underpinning legal framework for identity to the implementation framework. For example, technical requirements have been implemented by IDAS, as well as international standards, which define technical specification from the ISO, for example. But at GSMA, we are also building technical specifications, for example, on an open standard for enabling identity and authentication. And essentially, it's based on an open API. Some of you might have heard about the OpenID Connect framework. This is the technical specifications that we are using, but it's used broadly by the private sector. It's not, it is open. The last point I want to make about standard is also that, when we are talking about regulation and standards, it's also important that any standard which is defined at regulatory level should be outcome-based, should describe the principles which are aiming to achieve, that regulators are aiming to achieve together with market players to, for example, produce secure and reliable solutions with respect to the privacy of the users, but should not go into the details precisely not to have negative impact on innovation. Hugely important for identity.
Isabel, in your marketplace, interacting with fintech and so on, so how important is standards?
Yeah, I think standards are really important, and they help drive consistency of approach. I think that's where things are going to start to get a little bit more difficult when you start moving into the private sector, because what you're doing is each sector will have its own sector-specific requirements. So when looking at identity, for example, I mentioned in my presentation that the minimum data set that's set under the EIDAS framework isn't quite enough to open a bank account, for example. And just like if you're looking at different sectors, they're going to have different requirements. And then equally, even within those sectors and within those industries, you're going to have variety as well. So looking at financial services, because obviously that's more my area, you look at things like, you've got the Anti-Money Laundering Directive, which is one of the regulations which we have to adhere to when we're going through our KYC, our Know Your Customer processes. And that's set at the European level, but it's then transposed into each member state's law. And upon that transposition, some member states add something called gold plating. So they might add additional pieces which are required in that country. And then that makes that a relatively inconsistent approach when you're looking across Europe, because one country over here may have added some gold plating to that regulation, and then one country over here may not have, and so how can they then interoperate? As that starts to cause some inconsistency of approach, which can then make things difficult. So I think standards help to drive consistency. Definitely.
Yes, I want to jump in because, the case that was put forward by Isabel is tracking in relation to what the digital brought forward even more than in the past. The nearly compatible implementation of the KYC requirements, the customer due diligence requirement, becomes really, I would say, a big problem when digital allows you to go around the European countries in search of the service that better fit your need. And this is why next week the Commission will announce the establishment of an expert group on KYC and digital identity, an endeavor that is jointly led by DG Connect, DG FISMA, DG Just, which means the Director General in charge of the governance of electronic identification under EIDAS, anti-money laundering, and the financial and banking regulations to look into the way digital identity, and in particular the one associated to the EIDAS framework, could really make easier to meet the KYC requirement in a way that is consistent and may enable portability of KYC. I think that Isabel touched on it in her presentation, and clearly the portability of KYC is something that is not only for the benefit of banks or financial services, but for any type of cross-border use or cross-sector use of such such information that would have to establish a kind of, I would say, trust relation with the customer. I think that it was alluded to the interest of sharing economy. I can tell you that the first, indeed, conference that we organized after the adoption of the others regulation to see how EID could be promoted, where indeed we need to look at. Actually, we had to look at 3 sectors: banking and finance, sharing economy, and transport. And sharing economy was tracking how a less regulated market like sharing economy was actually distilling the same type of requirements in terms of authentication, reputations, authorization, and all the other elements that you need to have in place in order not to get your customer to move or migrate quickly away from your business, very closely and very close to what is for the banking and the private. But in order to reach this, we need to make, I would say, the case that there is benefit. And this is why they work on additional requirements, on the provisioning of credentials which are related to the finality of the transaction. So they need to know principle in the way in which trusted attestation can be served, are the direction we are considering in the context of the future activities of CEF. So in the context of the CEF Work Program 2018, we're looking actually at attributes and indeed, I would say, supporting the use beyond what is indeed the regulated environment for public sector.
We're talking about the digital single market. So we had some examples on the pan-European use. But I want to ask you, all of you, how far from reality do you think we are from the actual, genuine digital single market? Isabel, I'm going to leave you to last because I'm going to ask you about Brexit. Okay. Mark?
That's a great question. There's a big opportunity. Let's be very positive about this. There's a huge opportunity for harmonization. Okay, but where are we at the moment? We still have a fair bit of discontinuity across Europe in this, and IDAS is a great attempt to pull that together and create a common set of standards based somewhat on working practices at the moment. But there are huge differences across what we do in identity or even just in signatures across the region, and we're all working very hard to try and provide something which meets as many of those standards, is not just the lowest common denominator, but meets many of those standards. But if we all work on each and every individual regulated environment and try and meet that, often national, then we're going to miss the whole cross-border opportunity as well. So I live in the UK. Okay, hands up. I'm from Ireland. I spend a lot of time and family in Finland. I see two similar ones, which you wouldn't like to think could possibly diverge in Ireland and the UK, and then a very different one, but very practical one in Finland, which is a smaller market, but has been great at being practical about solving some of these issues and being as digital as possible. So all of us have to work on platform, and all of us have to work on some degree of harmonization, cross recognition.
David, are you as optimistic, or do you see still barriers between member states?
Oh, there are many barriers, yes. Still, I think we're chipping away at them. I think what I've seen lately, and I think what's going on here, is probably the most productive thing I've seen in 10 years in the B2B area, as far as breaking down those barriers and coming together as a single market. I see now companies actually are able to sell into markets that they never sold into before, because now they have a digital highway that'll take them there, or the governments are beginning to look like one government, right? I think the holy grail is, it shouldn't really make any difference, for example, which government you sell to. In the European Union, it should all be the same to some, small to medium enterprise, right? He can sell anywhere, and we're making, I think, tremendous progress. So I'm very optimistic about this, but there's still a ways to go. And but like I said, I'm very optimistic. I think we're doing the right things, and I think the things that we're doing are really helping. Okay, I think It's going in the next few years, in the next 5 years, I think it'll be a much different story. If we keep focused and keep driving forward with these building blocks, then I think 5 years from now, it'll be a completely different environment.
Totally agree. So if we can engage those organizations that either work from the various regulated environments that we have, if we can pull them together and have them all pulling towards some degree of convergence, then we'll make progress. And that's a little bit of what I talked about earlier. It's bringing in the trust service providers together into a common framework, common platform.
Marta, are we on the right
and
track?
I think I was thinking about the 5 years gap. I think, 5 years ago only the IDAS regulation was drafted and presented to the European Parliament. And now it's been implemented. And I think Europe has made tremendous progress. There are several initiatives which are ongoing, and every day there is something new which is happening in Europe. Large consortium of banks, mobile operators, insurance companies, postal services, which are coming together with the government to implement identity authentication for governments, but for private sector services. So this is not to say that the take-up is there. There is still a lot of work which needs to be done, and I think this is why we are here as well, to work together and make this possible. So I'm very optimistic. Hopefully in 5 years' time, we'll have most of the member states having a mobile ID, which is notified through IDAS as well.
Isabel, is the UK going to suffer by Brexit?
Quite a far-reaching question there.
If you could sort that out for us now,
yeah.
that'd be great.
I mean, and this is a hugely emotive issue for everyone in the UK and everyone outside of the UK and across Europe. And I think we always have to remember that when thinking of this. But I mean, when looking at this, so I'm going to hone that question right into my area of focus, which is digital identity and financial services and the EID space, and really look at that from the UK standpoint. So firstly, we brought the EIDAS regulation into UK law in July 2016, which was after the Brexit vote. So perhaps that's telling, I don't know. And secondly, I think I don't really envisage any reason why the UK would create systems in this space which wouldn't be interoperable with the rest of Europe. I mean, we're looking here to improve customer experience, to provide digital transactions around Europe and to facilitate that interoperability. I can't see any reason why we would want to step away from doing that. But I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what conversations are going on. So yeah, I mean, I don't have a view into this space. I just can't see any reason why we would want to step away from that.
It was a bit of a cruel question, but Andrea.
Of course, I'm optimistic because I believe in what I'm doing. But I'm optimistic because I think that what has characterized the last few years is that I would say we have put really the user, being the citizen or the enterprise or the public administration, at the heart of what we are doing. I think that is what is characterizing the strategy that was brought forward by the Commission and is being now realized. All the initiatives that, in the digital, the free flow of data, the IDAS regulation, the single digital gateway, the one solid principle cross-border, they're all really aiming at delivering value to the user, being the citizen, the small medium enterprise, the entrepreneurs, the governmental authority. And I think that this is what has changed, to some extent, the perspective. In the recent Tallinn Declaration, which was signed on e-government, which was alluded to by Commissioner Gabriel, the annex to the declaration is the user centricity principle, which the member states have signed off, to put the user at the center of the way in which public services have been delivered. Why is this so? I love to believe, because this is, I would say, the business model that in the digital has been the key to success for many offerings. And in this respect, Europe has a model to offer. I think that Marta put in a slide that there is this initiative at the level of UN Central to develop possibly a model law which is based on the federated model of EIDAS, is supported by member states, is being emulated. I was talking to Japanese last week. I had been contacted by Singapore, in relation to the digital identity. Even the state of Virginia in the US has adopted the same standard, the ADA standard, referring to ADA standard for the organization of the identity provisioning in the state of Virginia. We are working with NIST, as I think Martha alluded to. We have something to show as the model, because I think that what is I would say, the peculiarity of the approach is that it's respecting the differences, but at the same time it's provide transparency of the way in which we build trust. And that is, I think, is important, because it gives the choice. And this is why we need to keep pushing regulated environment, not only online platform, for instance. We are working on principles for interoperability on it, or towards less regulated environment, like sharing economy. There is a lot of value to be created there for the users and for the providers of services.
Okay, we have time for a couple of questions from the floor, if anyone has. Okay, we get a microphone over to you. Yeah. And if you could stand up and introduce yourself and keep it relatively brief. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, brief, it's one question, I think. You know me all. I'm Angelos Harlaftis, Epafos Advisors. I represent the EcoEFS movement, a movement which believes that we can turn Europe in a laboratorium of science, of democracy, and of arts. I have three questions for Andrea, who is doing a terrific work on the field and participatory, democratic. Andrea, trust, do you think that can be created without the security entities of the Union? Shouldn't in such high-level conferences any institution of the security should also contribute to the discussion of the trust? About Adobe, who is, and IBM, of course, who have given a lot to the international markets and knowledge, which we are, the Europeans, we are very concerned about the gnosis knowledge affairs. You want to assist the European SMEs, as you are telling, which they are not here today. But do you believe that is there another standard European multinational company which could be here and could antagonize you, which is also from your, not yours, for your company's birth country, the main law, competition? And about IBM, before I wanted to have a breeze to work a little bit, and the guys here, the colleagues from the technical department, which we have the same standards, they denied me to enter, and they were right, because of security reasons. I'm an intelligent entity. And you in IBM, you are working not only with Watson on the artificial intelligence, but much more progressive of intelligent units, which are around 10 years old. When we here in Europe, we have the most progressive 5, 6 years old. So do you think that if an intelligence entity enters to our systems, have we the control to defend? Thank you.
Okay, quite complex questions there for the second half. But Andrea, trust.
Were you taking notes on that, hopefully?
Took some notes, yeah.
I'll try. Certainly, I would say, if the ambition is to develop an ecosystem to support, to boost trust between parties in a fully digital environment, the participation of all the stakeholders in the discussion is important. Of course, I mean, we should not trade rights versus solutions or transparency versus security. I believe, I've been working in the field for many years, you don't have security without transparency and accountability. And that is where I think IADES is contributing. Now, as it was said before, IADES is setting a standard, but is in particular in implementing outcome-based, which means it delivers or is set what is to be delivered. It doesn't say how. And there is where the standards are important, and the participation of everybody to understand what is indeed that is going to be operationalized in terms of technical standard, technical solution is important to increase transparency, because with transparency, you support choice. If I have the possibility to choose what to use because I understand what is the type of engagement, I will even better understand what is the type of service that I'm getting. If I'm confronted with just a click, yes or no service, that is not a way to deliver solution. Security to me.
Okay.
And I think the second part was for me on behalf of Adobe. Yes, I believe that we could and should help the SMB sector right across Europe in being able to benefit from these standards and grow and scale. If I understood the question correctly, what European entities should be part of that or could be part of that? I think that is the very trust service providers that Adobe's seeking to work with through the Cloud Signature Consortium, because in each case they know one regulatory area or one, and I mean area, I mean industry or a regulated environment, or they know one or more regulatory regions, i.e. often countries. And by taking and putting all of those actors together with their expertise, regional, industry, regulated environment, whatever, in a common framework, which is open, okay? It's open to others as well than just Adobe, and Adobe does not own it, then that is a great way to do it, and that's what we're advocating through the Cloud Signature Consortium. I hope that is an answer. If not, we'll answer.
Okay, do we have any more questions? No? Okay, well then let me ask the audience a question. Sure. Oh, we have one here.
What was the question about IBM? I thought there was two. One was you asked about IBM being an American company, and there was something about a European company. Or what was?
Microphone, please. And we are a little bit short of time, so really succinct.
Yes, I thanked your company for the knowledge it's sharing with the world. And the main question for you, it was because yesterday at the Fundamental Rights at the Concilium, I have the difficult position always to put difficult questions as an opposition. A lady from the UK, who was representing the African Congress, told that we have to change the stories in Europe in order us to be developed better and compete the others. The question is about artificial intelligence, because you know better, you're a technician, it is connected to the EID, e-signature, and all these standards we make when we have an intelligence of any kind, mechanical or human. Thank you.
Intelligence, as you mean like
I think,
spying,
and I'm going to try and maybe
espionage,
twist the question a little bit. I mean, I guess what we're trying to touch on here is almost questions of cybersecurity, and regardless of without naming specific threats, how security can go hand in hand with the IDIS to create, I guess, trust. And
well, specifically in the AS4 profile, I suppose. So for B2B messaging, everything is encrypted, okay, in AS4, and strong encryption algorithms are used. Right now, I think we use AES 128 GCM, and that particular algorithm is considered, basically uncrackable. It's with any computers that we have around these days. So that information should not be penetrable by any intelligence agency that we're sending. And in fact, the encryptions are so good, if they're just applied correctly and you protect the key, then that all your information will be opaque to any sort of intelligence agency. And that's baked into the AS4 profile. And as a matter of fact, they actually keep track of what algorithms have been hacked and cracked. And so we actually, I think originally it came out, it was AES 128, and we moved to AES 128 GCM because they announced some vulnerabilities with XML. So if you follow the profile, the AS4 profile, so that is all taken into consideration, including anything that the NSA in America would do.
okay, yeah, let's not get into specific threat sources. I want to give the gentleman here who's had his hand up for quite a while a chance to speak.
My name is Mads Hjort. I'm from the Danish Agency of Digitization. And I'll just allow myself to explain the question again, because I think it's really, really relevant. Looking into a world of automatization and bring it down to IBM, Watson. Does Watson have an electronic identity? And the reason why we're asking this question is because software is starting to be involved in decision of citizens. So my best example is for big data and artificial intelligence, we want to do personalized medicine or personalized treatment. So I break my leg, my neighbor break her leg. She get this beautiful guy coming giving her massages every morning. I get a video, do it yourself. And the reason why we have different treatments is that the computer says so. That computer taking that decision of differentiating public service, does that have an identity? Can I trust it? How do I find out if it was this Watson or the other Watson, or what state was it in? So this idea of algorithmic identity, it's very complex, but it's very real. Does EID and building blocks have a thing to do with automated processing and automated decisions?
I don't think we have a building block that addresses that. Now I understand your question. You're talking about artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is, actually we plan to use that, and we've started to use that in the B2B world. But I don't think that it has an identity. The way that Watson works is Watson works in conjunction with people. It doesn't really make decisions on its own. Like it advises doctors. It's not your doctor. It advises doctors. And when it does advise them, it always explains exactly why it made a particular recommendation, and then a doctor would take that into account. So any sort of a medical treatment, Watson would explain to the doctor exactly why it thought your treatment should be different than the others. And it's that Watson isn't really designed to replace people. It's designed to augment their ability to make decisions and make good decisions. So I think the way we're positioning... Is it accountable, you said? It's accountable in that it provides an explanation. So, I mean, if you come in and if it recommends a particular chemotherapy, it will point to and say, here's 3 studies that came out in the last 6 months that said for this particular type of cancer, this particular drug administered in this way has been found to give 50% better results. Okay, that's its only accountability, is it will point you at exactly the information it used to make the decision, and then the final decision still is made by humans. Okay, Watson really augments, particularly in the medical field that you mentioned. It's not designed to replace the doctor. It's designed to the doctors and the nurses. It's designed to help them. And like I said, the only method of accountability it has, which is a really unique thing about Watson, is it can explain why it made a particular decision, and that's its only real accountability.
Okay, final question, and keep it really brief. And if you could stand up, please.
Yes, okay. My name is Pavel Riberts. I come from the company, which is e-delivery provider. And my question is, we have a private companies providing trust services, or that have been providing them for a long time. And then the government is stepping into the market with so-called the same services, providing them, so to say, for free, or let we say for taxpayers' money, or even with the funds provided by the EU. So this is a question for Mr. Servida. Of course, this creates quite uncertainty for the companies and will have impact on innovation in the long term and also quality of the service. So what is your position on this? Thank you.
Oh, it's crystal clear. I mean, I think that if you look at we're talking about trust services, and the trust in the others, the trust services are regulated according to a model, qualified and non-qualified. What makes you to decide to go for one or the other, not as a provider, as a relying party, so as a user, is the type of, I would say, legal certainty or legal risk that you may like to take or not to take. The qualified carries quite an important, I would say, presumptions in terms of the legal value of the service, whether it's delivery, it will be the full equivalent of the registered delivery service in the physical world, which is not necessarily the case when it's not qualified. And for the qualified, you have to be an established entity in the market, which means that you have to be independent from what is indeed the regulatory bodies that is providing the overlook to those services, which means that normally normally. I'm saying normally because we have had discussion in the past on this. Government won't be able to provide qualified services unless they establish themselves as a service provider, and therefore it will be competing in the market as the other one. So that is what I can tell you. For the rest, I think that is really up to what is indeed the trust that you bring to the user and what characterizes your offering vis-a-vis what may be done without any fees. A case, we provide the DSS, I have a colleague here, for the validation of electronic signatures. And the validation is, this is a tool that is there to validate. What is the responsibility? Is your responsibility to do validation of electronic signature? You want to have an authoritative validation of your signatures because for whatever reason you need it, you're a bank and you have electronic mandate, you receive qualified electronic signature from the other extreme of Europe. You want to make sure that the mandate to do a payment or a transfer is really supported by a qualified electronic signature. Then perhaps you may like to rely on qualified validation services, which will give you lower risk for legal challenges in court than if you had done your own validation based on open source tool as the DSS that we make available.
Okay, well, I think we could probably go on for another hour, but we're not going to because lunch is ready. But to bring it back to the whole topic of this panel, let me ask the audience a question for a show of hands. How many of you are as optimistic as David in thinking that these building blocks will give us a massive step forward towards the DSM in the next 5 years? Who thinks they're going to be very Great, okay. Right, well, with that, you can all go out and look at the stands, talk to each other, and give our panelists a big round of applause.
Can I say